Oh.
Sorry, that's my ring going off. Okay, welcome everybody. I hope everyone had a chance to look over the draft. But before we talk about that, I just wanted to make sure everyone's here quickly. I got Peggy Daneman, John Goodwin, Scott Hobbs, Kevin Moynihan, myself, and we're just missing Krista.
Lynn, Lynn, Art is not attending tonight.
Art should be. Let me see where Art is. You are correct. I'm missing Art. Oh, there's Krista. So John and Scott, it's really nice to see that it's light out in your windows behind you.
We're getting there.
Love it. Now we need warm weather.
Yeah. So I don't, so there's Krista. So I don't see Art. Okay, he's logging in right now. That's me. Sorry. Okay, so Art just said he should be logging in. So I'm waiting to see him. Uh-oh. There is Art. Okay. There he is. Okay. Sorry about that. I have two rowdy kids in the background. Okay, so I think we have everyone. So we have Scott Hobbs, Kevin Moynihan, Art Cassavant, Krista Nielsen, and John Goodwin, and myself.
And
So,
Peggy Daneman.
And Peggy Daneman. Where were? Oh, I thought I said you the first last time.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So I counted for you. So thank you guys for all coming back this time. I hope you've had an opportunity to read the draft. And I just wanted to preface this meeting with, I double booked myself. So I have a ZBA meeting at 7 p.m. So if we don't finish by 7, someone else is covering the start of that meeting. So it's not pressure, but if we have everything wrapped up, if we can keep it, if we can keep it concise and we have it wrapped up, then that'd be great. So first off, did everyone have a chance to go through the draft? I know some of you had comments. Does anyone want to start with their comments on the draft?
You're muted, Art.
Sorry, guys. I had a suggestion here, which is, and if you want to do this, Lynn, I'd be happy to drop it off tomorrow. I did make numerous comments, most of which were editorial, but there were 3 themes that I took away.
Okay.
One is, I don't think for public disclosure, we should ever conclude we can't reach the goal, right? Because it just, to me, even though that may be very difficult, we don't want to be defeatist. Second thing is, I think that wherever we say, and this is a generic comment, and it may be easier to just give you my marked comments, but wherever we say that we have publicly constructed housing, I think that we should be saying we have publicly supported housing, utilizing, and I've added things like a variety of tools, including state debt and low-income housing tax credits. And you know, I think that the section that you did, particularly with the ongoing strategies, was incredibly good. You know, and it's on page 18 or whatever, and it says, these are the things we're going to do. If anything, I think we should take out some of the references to items that were in the original plan that we haven't done, because the thing that jumped to my mind is, why talk about them if we haven't done them and never intend to? Because to me, what we want to get to is the stuff that we can do and we should do going forward. So, you know, and I appreciate the importance of the timing on this. I think you did an incredible amount of work, but I mean, rather than conclude we can never get there, I think we should just focus on the things that we can do to maybe get there. I would also like to add for the record that anybody who hasn't seen Fine Home Building should see this month's issue, because there's a great piece of one of Hobbs's projects, but that's another issue.
Fine home building? I didn't know
Fine
that.
Home. Yeah, did great. A barn you did in town. It looks super. Anyway, so I thought they were great comments. And Lynn, if it's useful, I could drop my marked deck off for you tomorrow.
If you could drop it off, or if you can scan your hard copy and email it, either way would work.
I'll just drop it for you tomorrow.
Okay. That's fine.
So,
Okay, I'm sorry.
go ahead, John.
Okay, at my end, I think the body is pretty good. What I felt was the first page, and I wrote in a lot, so therefore I did not put it directly into the edit. Lynn has a hard copy of what I did, but you know, I always believe in, you know, a good introduction, and what I thought was could be added to or expanded upon in the introduction was 2 things. One is where we have been a leader among communities of our size in the state. And so I wrote some verbiage to that. And then I also added, which would be needed to be checked, you know, by Lynn and you, Scott, to make sure I got the right terms. But I also felt that it would be worthwhile to add, you know, some of the hurdles that a community like ours has to deal with as well. So I was trying to, you know, put some context and upfront points to those. And that's something Lynn has.
I had a couple of themes under this stuff, which I'm not sure if it's beneficial to go to or not beneficial. So I'll just throw them out there, and while I feel pretty strongly about them, I also understand the fact it may entirely be defeating the purpose of what we're talking about here. One is, I don't know whether or not we should actually totally yield the point that the state's arbitrary 10% affordable housing has any more meaning than being arbitrary. And so somehow, and again, it takes a little clever wordsmithing. I didn't have time to do that, but something in order to, again, just put inside of there that, you know, right now we're kind of focusing on the state's arbitrary goal that again, 10%, there is nothing written anywhere that says that this is that as to why this is important or why 10% means anything. Regardless, though, I do think that we also need to put some work in somewhere here that our whole plan is subject to tremendous change depending upon rules and regulations that come down from Hartford. And we can phrase that on a positive side too, under the fact that also on the financial support available. Because if they end up, again, if they implement fair housing or fair share housing, then I'm not sure our plan actually, you know, we haven't addressed the biggest threat or the biggest challenges to the town. And at the same time, if they actually come up with some ways for us to more creatively or more, if they're more supportive of our efforts of creating additional housing, then that's wonderful that we'd be happy to, you know, go ahead and we can do more items and we can take it. And again, I don't know how to exactly phrase that part in there. Sorry, one, and I don't know, back to my first point a little bit, there's a huge problem that to the extent that 830G is out there, all of our efforts really kind of have to go toward 830G. Because if we develop 200 units of workforce housing, we've now got to go ahead and create another 20 units of affordable housing. And so that's you know, I don't know whether or not we want to actually point out the fact that the state's rules are focusing some of what our efforts are. So again, I recognize that may be beyond the pale of this. I just wanted to mention, and don't know if there's anything there, and happy to let that part die if inappropriate.
Scott, I kind of felt the same way. You know, is a document for looking at increasing affordable housing, even like by mentioning naturally occurring affordable housing, which doesn't, you know, isn't indeed limited or anything else. It's like it's almost as sort of a toss away in there. Is our focus on looking at the overall strategy to increase affordable housing units, whether or not they are identified and acceptable under 830G? You know, so it's I think we're of two minds on this document. We've certainly mentioned, you know, achieving the moratorium and doing that, but recognizing that we're maybe the 10% is never, you know, or it's, I shouldn't say never achievable, Art, but you know, it is a real stretch to think that we'll get there. But how can we increase the number of affordable units under workforce, special needs, senior housing, whatever, when we've got such a wide gap between our area of median income and the state median income? And also, I think to the point that John was talking about, some of the challenges we have. What is it? New Canaan is 99% developed. The land is, or 93%. So, you know, a huge percentage of our land is something that we can't, you know, that we just, it's just not there. So it's a question of redeveloping what's here in a way. And I feel like the document is sort of, sounds like we're running scared of 830G, which we are, but also we have to recognize the reality of it, but maybe put it in context of increasing the number of units, whether or not they are 830G, and somehow, you know, figuring out a way to say that we're doing this, and maybe have them recognize that what qualifies under 830G is not necessarily the be all end all of affordable housing, particularly in areas where there's a high income like we have.
Well, something I did do on the last page, and again, I didn't put in the doc, I gave a copy to Lynn, but partly to both of your points, I tried to wordsmith some of our conclusions, and the wordsmithing goes in the direction of partly saying we're forced to address 830G. We're forced, we have to.
Right.
So I did do some wordsmithing there. Reading it though, I did feel that, you know, we weren't just talking about 830G. I do think it comes out that we are also talking about a portfolio, so to speak. Of course, how the heck we get there due to Peggy, as you point out, and Art tells me 10 million times to the point where I'm ready to slit my throat. You're right, Art's right, is, you know, the challenge is how do you meet the needs of senior housing and workforce housing? And it's depressing.
And is there any issue, I mean, all the time, like for the, like the latest development in downtown, that actually meets like our plan for inclusionary housing. And of course, the moment somebody shows up with a plan that actually meets our inclusionary housing, we're sitting there going, well, no, we didn't really mean that. And are we creating anything inside of here that's the same way that we're actually, people are going to say, well, you said you wanted workforce housing, or you wanted senior housing, or you wanted something else. I mean, and again, I don't know how you get around it. I mean, I think that all the goals and objectives are here. And I think it's a good overarching plan, but is the practical implication, if there is one, I don't know. I mean, does anyone throw this back at us in some way or have any bad implications or?
Only
ahead,
one
Peter.
thing we need to be wary of, and that is we use the word control many times in this document. And I worry a little bit that if I were an attorney for Connecticut Fair Housing, that I could take this document and say, all this white community wishes to do is to control. And in fact, we don't do, if you go back to the document that we discussed, I think it was in October, when you look at the litany of things that we have actually successfully done, right? We don't give ourselves enough credit, right? Even down to the fact that we have developed a lot of more affordable units that don't qualify for 830G, as well as a large number of 830G eligible units. And for a community of 17,000 people, the actual achievement has been very significant. It has been done through the uniqueness of NYCHA, right? The uniqueness of the Housing Trust Fund, and in collaboration between public and private partnership entities that have utilized low-income housing tax credits and state debt to get stuff done. And we need to take a few of those positive assertion things just in case somebody pulls this out and says, how can I beat the blazes out of New Canaan from what they wrote in response to this document, right? And I almost wonder whether we should run the word control out of this document, even replace it with things like manage, because even the suggestion that we might be willing to do tax abatements to get developers who frankly have to meet the state guideline because of our rule, we shouldn't do a tax abatement for anybody. We should just increase the taxes, right? Get it to a point where it's not affordable to build the building is a better way of doing it than providing a tax abatement. But I mean, again, what we want to do is do a positive facing document that says, okay, here's where we are. We've done a ton over the last decade. We acknowledge that there is more to do, and we are actively considering a whole palette of opportunities. I mean, you think about where we are now as compared to 3 or 4 years ago, we are in a much better place. And the fact, and I don't know whether, Lynn, you want to add this or not, and honestly, this is probably an issue for Kevin more than anything else, is should we say, but for COVID, we would have achieved another moratorium, right? And that is something that might be useful to add here, because if in fact it hadn't been for the COVID related delays, we would have gotten another moratorium, right? We can't control for that. And maybe we don't want to be whiny, but those are things that we've done a ton.
Hey, John, can I make a couple comments?
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I gave this comment to Lynn earlier today. I have a problem defining our need for affordable housing in terms of the cost burdened households that are at under the 80% SMI. It's one thing to talk about the 830G target or goal, which we know is not achievable. But as long as we're working toward it, we're complying with what the state expects us to do. Going over that 500 or so, up to 1,000 or even 1,300 somewhere else, is to me not dealing with reality at all. I mean, people who, on page 89 of the, I'm sorry, it's page 47 of the Westcog. It said we have 1,319 households, 18% of our households who are cost burdened and under at the 80% SMI. One, I kind of question that number. And I kind of wonder what it comprises. Does it comprise seniors? Does it comprise people? Yeah, because I find that number surprisingly high. Even Darien is at 14%. And I think part of it's because we have more seniors. We have a lot more seniors than Darien does. But the fact of the matter is people have chosen to be cost burdened if they're already here. That should not be our goal. Our goal should be what the state expects us to do. Because the economics of New Canaan, we didn't create the economics of New Canaan. People created it by moving here and putting the demand on our housing. So I don't like quantifying our need in terms of the numbers beyond the 830G goal of about 500, which quite honestly, I mean, I don't see how we get 5 more Canaan parishes in New Canaan. So unlike Arthur, I would say it's an impossible goal for us to meet. It's similar to me, the state's goal for 20% open space, and the towns are responsible for 10% of that 20, or 10% of. And I mean, some towns have more, other towns have significantly less. Given the economics of Canaan, I don't have any problem acknowledging that because of the cost of land, lack of public transportation, the cost of living, that it's not realistic to expect we're going to get anywhere near the 10% goal the state is specifying. But as long as we're working toward it, increasing affordable housing in good faith, that should be our goal. And I wouldn't quantify it in terms of numbers. You may disagree. Especially anything over the 500 830G goal.
I think that the numbers are presented to indicate that there is a market there. My husband and I were talking, we no longer have a mortgage, it's paid off. We're probably living in naturally occurring affordable housing at this point. If you look at it, we might be in that category, though we're not in the income category of, under 80%. But I think it's sort of indicating that there is a need, not necessarily the number that needs to be provided, but the market is out there that would accept it.
Well, according to page 47, 33% of our households are cost burdened. Now, I think that's a high number. I dispute that number. I mean, that's not my experience with the Canaanites.
Well, it's their definition of cost burden.
And by the way, if they are, they're making a choice to be cost burdened to get the benefits of education.
And it's one thing if you're spending 40% of your income when you're making $60,000 a year.
Right.
If you're spending 50% of your income when you're making $1 million a year.
Exactly. I'm not sure.
Not a lot of tiers. I mean,
my only point is I think we extrapolated off the Westcog numbers as something that our goal should be. I would focus on 830G as the mandated goal, realizing even that goal is not realistic. There's also a chart in the Westcog about expected population growth, and I was impressed at how moderate they expect New Canaan's overall population growth to be over the next 10 and 20 years compared to some other towns. So if you're going to have modest population growth, you're also not going to achieve these numbers.
What year were those figures? Were those pre-pandemic?
That's a good point. I don't know exactly. Connecticut Housing, Affordable Housing Appeals list 2002 and 2020. And I'm not sure where the cost burden to 80 comes from. What? Again,
According to the document, it says that they pull the numbers from the 2015 to 2019 American Community Survey estimates.
Well, a little, as a practitioner of this stuff, I will point out that because all of it's done on a bell curve, it is mathematically impossible for anybody ever
Assess it
to
out.
solve or resolve this. And so we shouldn't be horribly troubled by this, because by definition, no matter where you are, you end up having to, for example, have a greater need for affordable housing, because it's defined based on averages of income, and then they slice off the percentage of it. And then they walk back and look at rents, right? And with current rent increases, most renter households are more housing cost troubled than owners, interestingly. So the one of the things, and it's the rubric of affordable housing, the way the math is calculated, there's always a growing demand as long as the population is growing. And it's solved based on the percentage of the people in the middle. So what we don't want to do is get caught up in our own machinations of is it true or not true, right? What we do want to say is we recognize the need for affordable housing of a bunch of diverse types. We've done a lot of stuff in our community. We acknowledge the need to do more. We want to encourage public-private partnership to provide it using every tool that we can use, ranging from low-income housing tax credits to state DOH money whenever possible. And we believe that we can improve our position. We're using the reverse of the logic that says you don't have enough affordable housing, because that's the argument that says, oh, because it's a bell curve, you're always behind. The only thing that I point out when I read this document, the only gap error that we made as a town, in my opinion, over the last decade, was allowing 500 new units of housing to get built without a single unit of affordable in those units. So if we were to learn a lesson, right, we've already fixed that, because by adding the requirement last year for new housing to have additional 830G eligible units, what we're in effect saying is, okay, we learned our lesson when we got all this housing built. We should have said you got to have a mandatory 10%. We didn't, but we fixed that. That's part of our roadmap to the future.
You know, if those 500 units had the 10%, we
We'd
would have
still be
had the
behind,
moratorium. We would have had the moratorium.
but we would have had the
without Canaan
moratorium.
Parish.
That's right.
Right.
And we've cured that, right? Because now you can't build without hitting that number. And we've got strategies in here. And, you know, you guys know how I feel about ADUs. I don't think it's a good strategy, but we're laying out possible strategies: tax abatement, public-private partnership, accessory dwelling units, congregate housing, identification of existing housing support, and unit of opportunities. We've laid out a whole action plan where if somebody says, is New Canaan really paying attention? The answer is, yeah, we're paying attention here. Now, do we want the town to build housing? I don't think so. And that's why in the draft that I'll give you, Lynn, I put in public-private partnership whenever possible, rather than NYCHA, right? NYCHA might be a resolution, but I would prefer to see a model where every new unit goes in has 15%, because then we're at least going the right way.
There's also, I think, and I don't know whether my track changes got in or not, but you know, Canaan Parish has been New Canaan Neighborhoods, which is a 501c3. It's a local nonprofit in joint partnership with NYCHA. You know, we've redeveloped these 100 units. So that is, you know, sort of an example of the type of thing. But I know with the zoning that you talk about, if you add in units, you've got to have the number of affordable, but it still is looking at higher density units than we've had in the past. And the majority of those are market rate. And I'm just wondering, with the limited land that we have to develop, does that get us where we need to be? Or are we looking at a larger number of relatively large, dense multifamily developments? That whereas we would get more bang for the buck if there was a higher percentage, up to 100% that were affordable, or 50% something that's with inclusion. So it's, I worry, you don't want to see every lot that comes up sort of coming into apartments. You just wonder whether there's some way of getting affordable housing integrated into smaller density developments. And maybe it's by having a higher percentage of them being affordable, if that's possible. But again, it requires the partnership that you're talking about, possibly with large funding. I'm coming from outside charities or churches or dioceses. I think, as Krista mentioned, New Orleans has a huge conglomeration of affordable housing projects with religious organizations. So that may be a possibility.
Art, it's one question that I had, is something that I've been looking into. How do you get Section 8 vouchers for the town? And is that even possible for a town like New Canaan?
So Section 8 vouchers come in two forms: project-specific vouchers and tenant-specific vouchers. So the answer is that there are people who live in town who definitely have tenant vouchers already. But those are called portable vouchers, and they can go anywhere. And many landlords still don't like to take them in the real world. That's a major fair housing issue, by the way. Project-specific vouchers come with the project when you apply for tax credits. The state, in effect, allocates those if you get eligibility under a project. But as we've discussed, it's hard to get 9% credits in a community like New Canaan. But 4% credits, you can get them. And many tenants will have tenant vouchers as part of their rent moving in.
And for tenant voucher, how does somebody apply and get those vouchers? Is that through a local housing authority, or
through a local housing authority? Yes.
But like, can New Canaan Housing Authority get an allocation of those, or we just go into a pool of something else?
You end up in a pool that DOH, in effect, administers, Department of Housing.
And do Section 8 is there any way for New Canaan to get credit for tenant applicable Section 8 vouchers, or we don't get credit for that?
Well, how you in effect get credit is if you have units that then get leased and they're eligible under the HUE or the occupancy rules, then they really help. And they're worth a barrel of money, because the real critical feature is not only do they exist, but you have a land use restriction agreement, which means you could track them. Without a LURA, it's really hard to track, for example. Theoretically, if you had somebody with a tenant-based voucher who moved into a 2-bedroom existing affordable unit, you would not know about that, even though there could be a bunch of people in town, unless there was a land use restriction agreement on the property, which most people are really hesitant to ever do.
Okay, thank you.
Art, have you ever seen the use of tax credits for a portion of market rate and affordable?
Yeah, you can condominiumize a project and create a project that has, quote, market rate housing, and then a separate component which has 100% affordable, for example. But it's very difficult, and it normally is only done in large urban settings. In New York City, they do tons of them. They're called 80/20s in New York City. And in that case, the 20% of the units become eligible under a separate program, and they're a totally different set of rules. But to make the math work, you need really big projects, of which we don't have any. I mean, largest project ever in town is probably the View, right, at 100 and however many units. The math and complexity of tracking make it really hard to do. Not a likely strategy. I mean, the other thing the town could do, if it really wants to, right? After you look at, and Lynn, your suggestion about noting particularly the need to have an active tracking mechanism of how we're doing against this is huge, because then when you roll in a year ago right? And one thing we could add is an agreement to do an annual report on our housing achievement, right? Which is actually a very good thing if we want to deal with community groups, right? We can absolutely have Lynn's office publish an annual report of how we're doing, and then give it to each of our legislators and say, hey guys, we're trying to do stuff. Can you help us in Hartford? Right? DOH money can be very advantageous. A year ago in West Hartford, for example, using credits on a deal, DOH came in and put in money that was cheaper than the banks because DOH had extra money. And that was because they were aware of a project that was going to go off.
Well, knowing that we have limited time, both tonight and until we're supposed to do our first push on this. I mean, except for sort of like, again, I think, again, I tended to agree more under Art's side of the thing, that we shouldn't necessarily say that we can't achieve something. But I do think that putting in there that something under the fact that these plans are subject to substantive change depending upon rules and regulations that come out of Hartford. Because again, by this fall, this may be entirely inapplicable. And then again, I think, so, a little bit of the wordsmithing, and I'm sure that John, taught a bunch of it. But in general, for our first mission of writing this sort of document, are we feeling pretty good about this to put in front of either the town or as a first draft, or to solicit comment on, or?
I think it'd be good to have John, I mean, the comments that have been given to Lynn to be incorporated and to send that around again. Once it's sort of been adjusted. Also, there's a couple of places I noticed where we referred to it as Housing Authority as Hank, and other times NYCHA. I think we need to be consistent through the document on that. There was a chart, I think, where it was.
And we finally adapted over to just to Hank. So
So should we
Still a lot of
switch all the
older-
NYCHA back to Hank? Then one or the other, but because I think it's confusing if you haven't, or you could say alternately called NYCHA and Hank, so you'd know what it was. But just to be consistent through the document for an outside reader.
hope it took me years to get to that point.
Yeah, so so I mean, to your point, we have additional comments which can be incorporated from both myself and Art. And then and maybe it's in there, Lynn. And I know there's next steps, but let me ask that question anyway. And so, well, one point to Art is in Lynn's job description for an additional member of the planning and zoning department, under that job description is tracking housing numbers. So Lynn, if that's not in there, maybe we point out the fact that that will be happening within your department. Right, Lynn? Give me a nod. Okay, want to make sure you wanted to make sure you agreed with me. And then the second thing I'm asking myself is, I mean, everybody hates to hire a consultant, but do we need, as a next step, do we need help, an RFP or something like that to, take this plan to the next step, as opposed to a bunch of part-timers putting it together?
John, are you referring to for our June deadline or after June?
After June. Well, to talk to it by the June deadline, but the actual happening of that would be, in my mind, after the June deadline. I mean, is that a good idea or is it a bad idea?
Well, I mean, it outlines a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think this group or a group needs to figure out which of these things we want to bite off after we get this submitted for the June deadline. And yeah, I think at that point, it does make sense to get a consultant involved to kind of start nibbling away at those pieces.
And also listening, I mean, look, you guys are smarter than I am on this, but it seems to me that we have these dichotomies between, how do you create affordable housing and how do you create workforce housing? And maybe if it's more focused it, maybe we can somehow weave our way through the dichotomy, and, maybe it's not as hopeless as I fear every time I listen to Mr. Cassavant. But, so my thinking there being is, maybe we can coalesce a plan that actually finds, a way, so to speak.
And at what
And can
point,
you remind us of the, like the timeline we're working under and what we need to have done when?
Sure. So ideally, we want to post it on the website, ideally this week, so that we can have it up for a month, essentially, so that people could comment on it if they have comments, if they don't. And then we also need to hold some sort of public engagement Zoom with for the public. And if this committee is okay with it, I was thinking that we could do that potentially the week of the 18th or the week of the 25th.
You're talking for public comment after it's posted this week. So the 18th is just 2 weeks away. Do we need to give them a longer than that to digest it?
We could. I mean, we could do it also. So we could do it. We don't have to do it on Monday. We could do it, say, on the 21st if we wanted to, which is the Thursday of that week. Or we could do it on the week of the 25th.
You're talking April or May?
April,
right, okay.
yeah. And I mean, I've actually been surprised that with all of the talk about affordable in town over the last couple of months, for the last several of our meetings, it is just us. There hasn't been a member of the public here at all. So I don't know how much comment or no comment, or if there will be a ton of comments on this plan. But if our meetings are a telling of what will happen, there may be no comments.
all the comments come out at the last meeting. Whenever you get the final draft, that's the first time people will come up to it and tell us how silly we are and how much we didn't pay attention and how dumb we are. But
Yeah,
can't help it.
a thought, Lynn, might be before we post this, right? I think that there's substantially good work here. And with the big turn for us is as opposed to saying we don't have to think about this, we've said we've done a lot of stuff and we are thinking about it, which is a great public position for us. What I think we should think about, though, is do you know what Darien? Do we know what Westport? Do we know what other similarly situated communities are going to say? Because one of the things in my own experience that I think we should think about is, will we end up publishing an appendix here, which then becomes the target for people who want to pick out a good or a bad community, right? Now, I mean, my thought on this is we've done a lot. We're glad to discuss it. We have forums, we have a trust fund, we have improved our analytics. We've actually built a bunch of units, and we are open to ideas from any comer, right? Right? That's a great set of messages. It doesn't mean we give up anything, but as opposed to saying that we want to control housing, we're saying we're open to ideas, bring us your ideas, right? And we're open to using state resources if state resources can help to solve the issue. I mean, it's just casting everything in a positive voice, as opposed to we don't want to do this voice. That's just my thought. And you know, again, the similarly situated communities, we're no different from any other similarly situated community. If you go to the public website and you look at high income communities throughout the state, and particularly focus on ones with between 12 and 20,000 people in them, and then look at their proportion of affordable housing. The same, you could write these same things for every one of those communities, right? They don't have a different problem than us, right? We don't have a different problem than them. We're on the same boat. Question is, we're doing something about it. We should be happy to say it.
I don't disagree with you, Art. I guess my question is, how do we get this to a point that we have something we can post this week?
Right, so if Lynn takes the aggregate of our comments and turns it around, we'll all give you comments again, right?
So do you want me to input everyone's comments and then re-forward to the group and everyone can re-comment? Because I could do that.
I would personally be of a vote that you take all of our comments, think about which ones make sense, and then produce a fresh draft and we could all look at it, right? Because if we all read each other's comments, it'll drive us, you know, you're not likely to end up with a better stew. You're just likely to end up with a lot of stuff. I think if you take everybody's comments and say, okay, I got that, and particularly John's upfront statement, I think is really the right way to start.
So then what I would see, I mean, I don't, to Lynn's schedule, I don't know how we make this happen, but what I would see is Lynn taking everyone's comments, incorporating them, using her discretion to incorporate them as she can in a draft. And then there's probably, I mean, just based on this call tonight, I hear some areas where we may not all agree. Like, for instance, do we want to say we're not going to be able to ever meet the 10% housing goal? Or do we not want to say that? Like, and so it sounds to me like some of those things are going to have to be talked through in terms of what this group collectively wants to say. And I don't know, again, how we do that on the time frame we're on, but that's what I'm hearing.
My recommendation on the 10% housing goal would be we fudge a middle road. We don't say, hey, there's no way in hell we'll ever get there, but you know, the tone of the document is for a town of this type, and I completely agree with Art. Is, you know, Chris and I talked to our colleagues in Darien and Westport and the like, and everybody knows, you know, you're not going to get there. So I would say to fudge a middle road for now, just to, you know, get to something we can put out there.
And I think we have to acknowledge that the way we get there may or may not be counted under 830G. You know, we may end up with 10% housing, you know, ultimately with workforce housing or senior housing or special needs, you know, group home kind of stuff, none of which counts under 830G, but yet it is still a viable goal for being affordable. And I think that, you know, whether that's the middle ground, but you kind of say that, okay, we know there's a need there, but it may not fit the state's definition of deeded affordable housing, but yet it is affordable.
Is everyone okay with that approach? Because I mean, to me, that was the approach of this document, is that the picture here is bigger than just always meeting 830G. But you know, obviously the focus has to be on 830G, because otherwise we can't do these other things because we're always chasing our tail.
No, I think in the draft we are talking to both, and maybe, you know, maybe if it looks like it's too 830G, then maybe we push up the other side or vice versa. But my read was we were talking to both.
Yeah. Okay.
I think if to me, the document seemed like it felt like 830G is breathing down our neck, which it does. But and maybe it's like looking at that and lurking, you know, in the background, but yet we're trying to make continual progress toward it.
I like
and
that.
do whatever we can to achieve it. But I think, you know, there's a lot of other need out there too.
Okay.
The only other thing just for consideration is whether or not, you know, with where the town is today, you know, with the fact of Arnold's project up on Weed and Elm, do we want to actually point a whole big needle right at 830G? Because I mean, there's still a level of craziness out there as to, you know, Kevin and even me and
Right.
John and everyone else, you know, collaborating with Arnold and being in partnership with him. And how the town's allowing this dirty deal to go through. You know, do you keep the focus on, and it's like, look, we're not lying to you, 830G is driving this whole discussion. And that this is
Yeah.
the point, do we want to do that here, or do we skip that inside of this document and try to deal with it as you know, again, 830G is a big deal and it would be in the document, but do you use this as an opportunity to push people or not? And I don't know what the right answer is on that.
I don't think you can ignore it, Scott. I think it's dominant. It's a dominant piece, which is motivating this thing. But the need for affordable that we're talking about is much broader than 830G.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, I think what we need to do, right? And the balance that John suggested with his preamble, I think is the right way to do this. We're trying to improve affordable housing in a set of dimensions. One of them is 830G. But there are other components that are important to us, and we're open to all ideas that people bring to the table. And here are some of the things that we've done, and here are some of our ideas of the future. And the only reason I suggested remove words like never, right, is it's whiny. People are going to say, look, you're one of the most affluent communities in the United States, you know, and as a 30-year New Canaan resident, I'll tell you, right, which I am. When I moved into town in 1990, everybody said, oh, there's going to be no new housing. There's no new land here, right? There's no new anything, right? 30 years later, we have another 1,000 or 1,200 units built. We can't say there's no more land. We can't say there's no more opportunity. We can't say we don't have resources without sounding whiny. Now, maybe we don't care, but my point is I want to write a document here, which if it's put on the cover of the Hartford Courant, right? Will an objective reader say, that town down there is trying to do some good stuff. They're not a bunch of crazy people saying, stay away, right? Or will they say, you know, if we don't tell them about the stuff we've done, nobody's going to know. And if we inculcate in here, never, can't do, big gap, blah, 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 that's what jumps at me, right? And I'd say big resources, there's got to be a lot of room there. Your average lot size is Q, right? I'm just trying to put a public relations spin on it, reflecting what we have actually done, acknowledging there's more to do. And Lynn, the reason I suggested removing the things we didn't do is the litany of stuff, witness the lumberyard lot. We list a bunch of stuff that was in our plan 10 years ago. And we then say, but we didn't do any of it, which calls to mind, well, why didn't you do any of it? And don't tell me that you can't meet the goals if you haven't done stuff that was identified 10 years ago as a possibility, and yet you still want to complain about it, right? I mean, and if that's all I'm trying to get to, when in fact we did do a ton of stuff. Who thought Canaan Parish could get turned into 104 units? Nobody.
It's only 100, aren't 100.
I'm trying to get the John Goodwin Good Guy Award. Love it.
So just my 2 cents, based on what we've said here, it sort of sounds like we should highlight some of 830G, because for a community of our demographic, it's really hard to achieve 830G, but we've still done stuff. And that sort of points to the fault of the state's legislation, in that they're creating a legislation for all 169 municipalities, and they're not thinking about each individual municipality and how they've developed this and how everyone has to achieve the goal. And we've sort of thought outside the box that there are other ways to still get there, even with the constraints of the 830G, and sort of points out how unrealistic their arbitrary numbers are.
So Lynn, I'd agree with everything you said, except the last clause, because we're not going to win that debate in this document, right?
Okay.
Nobody cares that we think they're an arbitrary number. Nobody. And each time we assert that, we lose a notch in public relations. That's my personal view. Because it ain't going to go away.
I do think, to the point of looking at putting as a goal, or putting as a goal for the coming future after this document's end, but talk about a consultant who could come in with sort of fresh eyes, looking at a plan from a planning perspective, look at our needs and say, and help us identify maybe ways that we are entrenched in the community, but maybe new ways of looking at creative ways that we could do it, because other towns are doing that and successfully that we hadn't thought of yet. Again, we're open to new ideas. This, the signs that are all up all over the place, affordable housing, yes. Okay, come on, guys. Tell us how to do that. Help us figure that out. That's, I think but a consultant possibly with fresh eyes to our community could come up with some ideas that we could try. That we can
So Peggy,
consider.
I totally agree with you. I don't think we have it all figured out by a long shot. And, someone else said earlier, see what Westport and Darien are doing. And I think that's also completely appropriate. I think it's a little odd for us to write and publish a plan and then hire somebody to tell us what we should do when we already put some things down on paper that we think we should do. So I think at the very least, we have to use this as a jump off document. I think that maybe through the POCD process in 2024, we have an opportunity to kind of, we're not required to revise this, but we have an opportunity to kind of bring another set of fresh eyes to what we've said here. So that's maybe how I would approach that.
John, I have to excuse
Sorry.
myself for a board meeting at 7 o'clock, so excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you.
That said, would we nonetheless want, I sort of thought a corollary of a consultant is, also including that some sort of iteration of us would continue.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing that I'm wondering whether we should put in there. You could say you could stick it under P and Z, but then it's only members of P and Z, which I don't think it should be. So that's just one other idea to throw out to the group. Should we specify, and that goes back to the commitment as well, because you just want to, if we're serious about this thing, we don't want to do yet another study and have it gather dust. So that's a question I throw out to everybody. Is a good idea to add that.
It also gives us, I think that's a good idea. It also gives us the flexibility to be able to respond when the state comes in and changes everything,
Yeah.
depending on what they decide in Hartford.
Yeah, so we just came up with 3 additional good ideas, right? Consider hiring a consultant to dive deeper into opportunities. Do an annual report to the community about our performance against this plan, which, by the way, anybody could get anyhow if they want it. And 3, continue the review of this via the Board of Selectmen subcommittee as we create future strategies.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm thinking, and I'll take a shot at it, but if you guys agree, is I think the last page, I actually added some wordsmithing, which Lynn has, but I think it's a little too negative. And so I do, and I'm going to try to add something to it. I think that the last page sort of ends with, woe is us because of 830G. And so I think we want to add a little bit, something talking about the other things that we're focused on. I think it's important to have that in the last page. So, I'd ask all you guys to take a look at it. If you agree, feel free to, give Lynn something, but I'm going to try to do the same thing by tomorrow.
So essentially you're saying end on a higher note.
Yeah. Because it sort of ends by, well, I'm not gonna repeat myself. Yes. Well, not a higher note, but the fact that, I think everybody agrees it's 830G, but it's also other affordable housing. And I think we need to get it in there in the conclusion. And maybe that's also where we put, if we agree on the consultant / ongoing committee idea. That's a good place to put it too.
So
I think your
per-
page
Go ahead.
that lists the actions is a superb action page, by the way. You could almost do that one page with, this is what we intend to do about all of it, right? And those of us who live by action plans like that, right? And, hey, We won't get all 10 items done, but if we got 6 done, that's progress.
Scott, do you know if the organization that Hank just joined, that's kind of what they do, right?
I'm not positive.
Yeah, or is it just a,
They likely have resources that are, I mean, there's a lot of groups that have resources available to help on this sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So I know many consultants in this space, right? Because I do this to some degree for a living. The real problem with that is they're going to come back and repeat the strategies that we have identified. But that's a separate discussion from, do we want to put this in our deck? Because what a housing consultant would tell us, and I know 2 or 3 guys in Connecticut who are pretty good. First off, they're all getting all these requests. They're minting money. They're using the same damn report, and they're all going to say, read the QAP, get a private developer, tell them what your local rules are, and be ready to give them a tax abatement.
Okay.
So you know, that's one way to deal with it. But
But
that's okay.
Art and Scott, is that a good recommendation? You guys know this. I mean, is it a good idea?
Well, so tax abatements are fascinating. In major cities, they never do tax abatements for affordable housing, never. And most developers don't ask for them because they know they'll run into into finance department problems when they try to get a tax abatement, and it still requires hookups and police coverage and everything else. So most developers don't even ask for tax abatements. We probably don't want to give tax abatements. The alternate strategy is say, build your building and we're taxing you at full rate, then see whether people still build. But that's okay.
I mean, I would say that at some point over the next year or so, you know, having a few developers talk to a few people on P&Z and really bring in the math is to like, look, here's the development pro formas. This is what works. And if you want people to do something in New Canaan, you know, here's where this number has to be, or you're basically saying nothing's going to happen. And again, that's something that can happen over a longer period. I think you guys did well setting up a good, reasonable defense right now. What I do hear back from the developers is that at the current, you know, payoff rates, no one's going to pay anything. And again, it stresses the pre-pandemic. It certainly stressed the pro forma. Right now, who the hell knows what anything is? I mean, we can't price anything and we don't know what people will rent for. So it's tough to do pro formas right now.
Yeah. And by the way,
Oh,
Scott,
I just
I'm sorry.
finished.
Sorry. Go
I
ahead.
just financed a project in Vermont with a unit cost of $610,000 per affordable unit. And it started out at 320.
what size unit?
That they're 1 bedrooms.
Oh, my gosh.
The cost, I mean, Scott's the one who knows this. The costs are impossible
Wow.
right now.
Yeah, well, we know that. So, sure.
What's the average square foot size, Art, for that 1 bedroom?
720, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's, you know.
I'm just trying to figure out how we make this work. I mean, I've heard a couple new strategies that I think maybe we need to add. Were there any strategies in there that we disagree with, is question number 1. And question number 2 is, you know, Art, you commented that you like the table on page 21. I mean, I guess we don't have to go into the level of detail that's gone into after that. We could, I mean, there's no requirements for this plan, right? In terms of what it says. I think we went above and beyond the call by detailing ideas of how we could do each of those strategies. I don't know if we have to do that. Is it in our best interest to pull back some so that we haven't put out in the public view, you know, a whole litany of things that we may want to consider doing, but maybe we don't want to consider doing? We've just been a little more generic.
There may be a way of softening the language to make it more, it's under consideration as opposed to, you know, this is something we plan to look into for sure, because like, I think there was a comment on the, you know, in the change column of, you know, these things are too progressive, it may cause a problem. But so if you soften the language and say, we're open to new ideas, including, you know, this, these are some that we might possibly consider, type of thing. And soften that a little bit if you want to, or back off on the detail and not provide the meat like that, because that's when it comes back to bite you, when people say, well, you didn't do this, or you didn't look at this. We said, well, we decided we weren't going to. And as long as we say that in the document, that it's one that we might consider, it's,
So
Um,
that's Peggy, is why I'd love to know what Darien and
Mhm.
Westport and other communities are going to say. For example, if all three communities said, we're going to consider tax abatements, then everybody and his brother would be saying, oh, those towns are desperate. They should all do huge tax abatements, blah, blah, blah. And then
Mhm.
there's an interesting, if it's us alone, then that's another interesting point, right? And you know, just saying that we would consider a strategy is a long way from us even having the authority to implement it, or the town fathers of you, right? One of the things that I think we should add here is to encourage public-private partnership, because I don't think the town wants to construct. The town
Right.
does want to support, finance, develop, asset manage and maintain properties, particularly through Hank. But,
Right.
you know, we want to be open to people coming in and doing things that work.
Well,
I mean, even like, whether a trust fund or a consortium or some kind of a charitable fund or something, where a landlord could come and say, I want to do this, but I need a rent subsidy of a certain amount, to allow a person, it's sort of like doing our own section, the New Canaan Section 8 issues kind of thing on limited basis. Is, I mean, as I said, I'm just trying to brainstorm a little bit, but something like that, if we had, resource to draw on that could supplement a landlord's income, and the person is not cost burdened, and that's a way of sort of setting it up. It's I just wonder whether that's something that nonprofits could work on, or some kind of, not a slush fund, but some kind of managed fund that would help. I don't know. It's because you're talking sometimes, $1,000, $1,000 or $500 a month, sometimes to help a landlord take a client who can only afford a modest rent. So sort of supplementing the landlord's agreement.
Art, to your thing about the other town plans, I think Lynn, between, listserv or your planner buddies, or Krista, our P&Z chair buddies, we can probably reach out and see if we can get drafts, if you guys think that would help.
Yeah, I'll
Did
just
anybody-
say, I was telling Lynn today that I get emails from, I'm not sure if it was Desegregate Connecticut or some type of group that was trying to get people to come out to the public hearings that are being had on all the different plans right now. I haven't seen Westport and Darien's on the list. I did see Greenwich on the list as a public hearing you should go to. It may not be as comparable to us. But yeah, we can look into
But
it.
I'm just wondering if we ask our P&Z chair buddies whether they have a draft that they're willing to share with us, and we could circulate it.
Okay.
And then
Did anybody listen in on the Fairfield meeting last week, or this last week, I guess it was?
No.
Last
No.
Wednesday.
I did get the Desegregate Connecticut email at work, from in my other life, said, please go to these, right? So.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember off the top of my head which towns were having the public hearings now, which would mean they have a draft available. I don't recall seeing Darien and Greenwich, but they very well may.
Well, will Westcog be posting them to their website? Because they did have a good list posted. I think in the I guess the tech or the document that Lynn sent out originally. I was wondering if it's updated. If you go back on, they may have more that have been submitted and be posted on the plans, because they're out there.
Lynn, do we know, has Westcog talked about which towns are doing the appendix versus their own thing? Because I think some town, like I think Greenwich is just writing their whole own plan. They're not tacking on to the Westcog plan. They're like doing their own thing. And so I don't know like what every town is doing, who's participating in the Westcog and who's not.
I can get a list from them. It was a good chunk of the Westcog members were going with Westcog originally, but as we came closer to the deadline, people were sort of going out on their own because everyone realized that Westcog's timeline didn't jive with theirs, and there's still some that are not even done yet. But I can find out from Westcog who else is not doing it. I mean, we know Norwalk isn't, Greenwich isn't. And
Stanford.
I'm sorry.
Stanford.
I don't think. Well, I don't think I've seen a Stanford plan yet, but they're well over 10%. So I think they're actually at 30%, if I recall the number. But
I think they said only 13. I think that didn't they say 13 when we met with them, Scott? Stanford, I think mentioned 13. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they're well over, and so is well, Norwalk, Stanford, and there was one more I thought that was over. But I can go back and double check with Westcog and get some of their feedback.
One other thought at my end, I mean, somebody said, should we provide the meat we have in there on the strategies after page 21? I would say let's keep it in. I mean, let's put it out there. That's the best way to get feedback. You put stuff out there. So yeah, I would say just keep it in.
Because we can all, and no matter what, also, we can always just do how like our legislature passes bills. Is you go ahead and just, you know, whatever we put out there, and then once we pass through committee, we change it to whatever we want anyway.
Well, plus to John's point, I think putting it out there shows us working in good faith towards some of these things. Like we actually are thinking about this. We're not just checking the box and doing a plan. We've put a little thought into it.
And I also think that just because we say we put it out there, you know, we can actually think about it. We could go through the process of seeing whether it'll work, and then we could dismiss it for legitimate reasons, that it just isn't feasible in New Canaan for whatever reason.
Sure. That's the point of
So
it.
apropos of that point, last night when I was reading Fine Home Building, I was looking at that great barn that he built. I said, we could all move in there and we're all set.
Is it affordable?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
People who live there.
Yeah, right.
I'll drop that off in your office for you, Scott. So Lynn, I will make sure I run this by it maybe tomorrow afternoon before I can get it to your office, okay? Because I got to
Okay.
be in Bridgeport in the morning, but.
Okay, that's fine. If it's easier, you can also scan and just email it, and
It's easier to drop it than it is. I don't
Okay.
have a scanner at home, and by the time I scan it, and just, you know.
okay, that's fine.
Okay, well, we got to get Lynn to our ZBA meeting. Lynn, anything else we need to cover?
I think that's it. I'm gonna make a strong effort to take everyone's editorial comments and refinesse it into the document, and see if we can circulate that around and get additional comments, and perhaps it'll be ready for posting later this week if everyone's okay with it, or at least thinks it's ready for the public eye. And we could always still take things out afterwards. At the end of the day, if we get negative feedback from the public on specific items, we could choose to dismiss it and delete it because it doesn't work for New Canaan for whatever reason.
And when do you want the feedback back, Lynn?
As soon as possible. Well, this feedback would be as soon as possible.
Okay.
And then
I'll be on a plane tomorrow, but I get in tomorrow night, so that's okay. I'm back. I'm in Atlanta in pollen land right now. Spring is here and all the pollen.
I was gonna say it's spring, huh? Spring down
Oh,
there.
yeah. Everything is yellow.
Again, it's a little chilly and it's going to be rainy up here. So I think you enjoy Atlanta.
Well, yeah, it's 75 degrees today, but a lot of pollen. So
Okay, Lynn, we good?
we are good. So just out of curiosity, what would you guys be able to do a meeting the week of the 18th or the week of the 25th? That would be the last item I'd want to cover before we sign off.
You
I
mean
am-
for the public comment?
Yes.
I have a travel to the West Coast, which is out of my control. I do my best to join something, but I leave on the morning that Tuesday and I'm pretty packed right through Friday night.
I
For
could,
which week?
this is us, not the public meeting.
Yes,
Wait, I thought you
Wait.
just said it was the public meeting.
That's the
public comment,
public comment
There's the
meeting.
public comment.
yes.
So if we were to meet on a Monday, would that work? So if you're leaving Tuesday, Art,
But this is the public comment date we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Do
Yeah.
we
I could-
all need to be there?
Ideally, but if you can't, then
I physically cannot. I mean, I'm gonna be in California,
I could do
Which
the
week
night.
is that, Art?
18 through 22.
Got it.
I could do the night of the 18th and then I'm traveling the rest of that week.
What's the week of the 25th like for everyone?
We have planning and zoning the 26th, right?
yes. I was just
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
say we can't do it the 26th.
And I can't do the 27th, but
I could do the 25th.
you could do the 25th, or I cannot do the 26th. That's the only night I can't do.
I'd love to do the 26th.
Combine it, right?
I can do either the 18th or the
No,
25th. but it
avoid
sounds like
P
the-
and Z, Peggy.
So I mean, I can circulate them in an email if we can't come up with a date right now, but it sounds like the 18th or the 25th are the two dates that are most popular, which are both Monday nights.
That's what I can do. I think
Is there a
Scott
preference?
nodded yes.
I would push towards the 25th just to buy ourselves more time to get this the way we want it.
Okay. I can hold the 25th and then see what our status is in the next day or two. And then if we can get it posted, then we can advertise that that's the date we would take public comment.
And then the next step, once it's complete, we take it to the first selectman, that the selectman's office or selectman's meeting, they have to approve it, and then it goes to Westcog, is that right?
Yes, they would have to approve it and accept it.
Okay.
And Lynn, maybe we put a discussion on P and Z's agenda for the 26th in regular meeting mode.
We could do that.
Scott and Peggy, we had at our last P and Z meeting, we had a very good discussion and there's a lot of interest, and so.
Great.
Okay, Lynn, we good?
We are good. Do we?
Thank you
do we have
very
a vote
much.
do we have a vote to adjourn?
I would so move.
So move.
So, second.
Okay,
Double hand.
awesome.
Okay,
Thank you
guys.
guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.